Thanks so much for coming back. Thanks again for taking some time from your busy work lives to listen to what we've got to say up here. I just wanted to, if it's okay, just do a small recap. Thank you to the sponsors, and then I'm going to bring Lizzy in just a second. So this morning, myself and Emma sort of introduced the subject of welfare, and what that means, and we're going to slowly bring that to life over the course of the day. We started off with, if you saw it, just a brilliant speech from Callie, who was just fantastic, just wonderful. We moved forward through to Martin's Law, and that has a almost sort of direct parallel with what we're talking about here around accessibility, this idea of what was once nice is now law, and what we as event organisers need to start doing more of. We're going to move towards the rest of the afternoon around security and safety for delegates. And then we're going to have a sort of a close-up session. And I sort of made light of the fact that, like, there's some serious laws coming in and things like that, and lots of problems being laid at events organisers' feet. And towards the end of the day, we'll start trying to solve them. So stick around for that if you can. A quick thank you. Look, because of all, we can't do this without people like UTAC who really care about education, and I'm really glad that they care about education because they allow us to do education. So just a big shout out for UTAC. And you wouldn't be able to hear us if it wasn't for the nice people at Lighthouse who are really good in terms of the production stuff as well. So we thank them as well, and I should always say that we always feel so warm and friendly and loved in Leeds. So thanks to Conference Leeds around that as well. So thanks to all of those guys before we carry on. So accessibility. I did a straw poll before the last session, which was, are you here because you're an old sage around accessibility, you know everything, and you just want to top up your knowledge? Are you the exact opposite end of the stream, or maybe somewhere in between? So maybe we could start with that. If you feel like you're on top of this subject, could you maybe raise your hands just so Lizzy can get an idea of who we're talking to? Is this a subject that you're kind of going, actually, yeah, I'm all right with? Okay, so no one, right? Yeah, you were saying that's not abnormal. We should all feel good about ourselves after this. How about the other end, which is, this is brand new to me. I read it in the conference program. I've decided to come in because it's new. Just raise your hands. Yeah, a few people. And so I guess most people in the middle? Okay, fantastic. Okay, so this is not abnormal. Okay, so what it's going to be. So here's what we're going to do. Lizzy, you're going to present. You're going to talk a little bit.
Briefing.
Yeah, a briefing.
Briefing.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff to unpick.
Okay.
And then we're going to have a chat. So I'm going to give a briefing for the first 15 minutes, and then you guys can tell me about what you're finding the most challenging part of becoming compliant with the EU Accessibility Act, any other challenges you're having in making your events more accessible, etc., etc. And we can have sort of a community discussion. Fantastic. Around our challenges. Is that all right?
Yeah, that's great. But before we do, and while Lizzy gets her first slide out there, we should actually give her a massive warm round of applause and thank you for your time. Lizzy!
Thank you. I'm going to try and transition to... No. Can you do it for me? Thank you. Lovely. This is me. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me this afternoon. What a lovely crowd and a lovely space. I'm really glad to be here, and everyone it's been so welcoming so far. So you might be wondering why I'm here talking about accessibility. First of all, let me tell you what I do. I'm the founder and director of Oddity Events and Marketing. We're a boutique agency, and we specialise in delivering events with personality to high-level audiences. We work mostly in the UK, but we do events all over the globe for brands like Strava, Uber, the Tony Blair Institute, lots of charities, trade associations, campaign groups, you name it. I've been the owner of my business for 7 years-ish, nearly. And before that, I worked as head of events and marketing for a prestigious public affairs and communications strategy consultancy called Portland Communications. Before that, I worked at Informa Group, and I was running shows for multi-million-pound budgets. Before that, I worked at a medical association delivering events of up to 3,000 people, up to tiny, small training ones for 20 people. So I've got a pretty broad brushstroke of experience. But let me tell you about why I'm here as an advocate for people with disabilities at events. So when I was at my old agency, I was responsible for delivering events for the whole company. And we were doing an internal event that was just a run-of-the-mill one, easy, had done 100 of them, no problems. I was made aware of somebody who had joined as a new starter who required step-free access. So I went to the venue and I said, "Hi, do you have step-free access?" And they said, "Yeah." And I left it at that. The problem is, when it came to the day of the event, my colleague emailed me to tell me that he had done the due diligence himself and declined the invitation to attend because he found out that the step-free access was at the back of the venue, through the kitchens and through the sort of service route of the venue to get to the event where the rest of his colleagues were. As you can imagine, that didn't make him feel very good. And he said to me, "Lizzy, when I come to events, I don't want to be reminded of my disability from the moment I get there to the moment I leave." And I just had the most incredible wake-up call that I had been in this industry and had my career for nearly a decade, and I hadn't had any formal training. I didn't have the knowledge or the sense of the extra steps that I needed to take to make sure everyone felt welcome at my events. And I realised that that training wasn't offered to me either. So I took it upon myself to learn more about what accessibility at events means. I created the Inclusive Event Design Playbook with my team at Oddity Events a couple of years ago, and that meant going through a year of intensive training through organisations like Purple Tuesday, and we surveyed lots of people with lived experience, and they told us what their experience at attending events was like living with a disability. We did loads of research, and we looked at different resources like the Business Disability Forum, and we went to events for disabled people, and it helped us gain that understanding of the steps that we needed to take to make our events more accessible. The next step to that was creating the Inclusive Event Design community, which if you search for it on LinkedIn, you'll find it, and I'm working in partnership with Gabby Austin-Brown from Diversity Alliance to get that community up and running. And the reason we're doing that is to help people become more compliant with the EU Accessibility Act. If you don't mind transitioning my next slide, thank you. So before I start, I just want to caveat that I am in no means an expert in EU legislation, thank God, and I'm not an expert in accessibility. What I am is a passionate event professional trying to be better at her job, make my event more inclusive and welcoming for people who have all sorts of needs, all sorts of backgrounds, and generally just drive best practice in an industry that I think is lagging behind. So let's get on to the scary stuff. I don't intend it to be scary. It's not going to be scary, is it? It's going to be fine. If you don't mind transitioning to the next one. Oh, this is right, yeah. So it was adopted in 2019, but it takes effect this year. It might have been bandied around as a 2019 Act, but the reason why it's called the 2025 Act is because EU member states have to implement the EU Accessibility Act into law this year by June. It aims to ensure full participation of people with disabilities in society. So you might have seen over the years that people with disabilities have become more enabled to enter the corporate workforce, more enabled to go on experiences, to use retail services, banking services, so on and so forth. What this does is to transcend from the physical accessibility element of society into the digital accessibility element. So this Act really, really emphasises digital products and services, which is almost half of what we do in our roles. So by 2030, all eligible businesses are required to abandon non-accessible practices. That means that now we need to start getting our strategies in place, we need to start having a real stock take of our suppliers, of our venues, of our partners, and then by 2030, we need to be able to be confident in delivering accessible and inclusive events. So what does this mean for UK event organisers? Thank you. This is the key here, UK. Brexit happened, yeah, but it doesn't make any difference if you are running events in Europe or if you are inviting people from a EU member state to your event in the UK. If you have a market in Europe and you're communicating to a European audience, you need your events to be compliant. Second thing it means for us, style over suitability is no longer an option. We need to have an urgent review of our priorities and completely change our attitude towards the law. I've seen so many examples, and there was one on the news recently as well, where a disabled person wasn't able to accept an award on stage because the planner hadn't made it accessible for her to accept that award. That's not okay. We need to be doing the due diligence. Not only is it not okay, but it's also illegal. The Equalities Act suggests that we need to be making our physical spaces accessible for people who need it, and we're just being a bit fast and loose with the law, I think. So this means auditing and creating accessibility strategy, and potentially even re-tendering to some of our key suppliers and partners to make sure that they're not holding you back on your compliance journey if you need to do it. The third thing it means for us is that we have the opportunity to be competitive and create new commercial opportunities by bringing in a wider audience to our events. Because of the changes in the law and more people are going to be coming into the workforce who might be neurodivergent or might have physical accessibility requirements, you're going to be coming across more individuals who have the need for extra accommodations anyway. So you need to be kind of on top of it because you're going to be encountering it more. So I don't know if you've heard of it, but the purple pound is a statistic that sort of suggests that the economic force of disabled people is around £274 billion annually, which is a huge spend. If we are sort of purposefully closing the door to people who have that much buying power, then we're not being commercially sensible. So it makes business sense for us to be more inclusive and accessible with our planning as well. Let's transition to the next one, please. Thank you. I'm just going to put this down. Actually, it's comforting for me. I'll keep it. Right. Thanks, mate. So, what are the key requirements that affect events? We've talked a little bit about the best practice element of it, but the fact of the matter is, if you are not compliant, you may be penalised with a fine of up to 4% of your annual turnover if you are, if somebody makes a complaint against you and it's deemed that your event or your business is not compliant. So, as I mentioned before, I'm not an expert and I'm going to try to keep this quite light. I don't want to scare you. We're in this together. I'm still very much on a learning journey. I'm not going to cover every single minutiae detail, but I want to highlight the major requirements that affect our work now. And as I mentioned before, the emphasis of the Act is on digital accessibility, but that's because there's already some laws in place on the physical side. But what we're trying to do is take the law further and create a sort of full circle legislation for people with disabilities, where they're having to do so much of the work to make life easier for themselves when actually we're the ones creating the barriers. So for physical, let's move on to the next one. Thank you. So first key requirement is digital accessibility. That means that we need our websites, apps, ticketing systems, digital communications, virtual hybrid event platforms to be perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. For websites, for example, your text needs to be readable by screen readers, and you need to have alternative text descriptions on any images that you have on a website. You need to have the correct color contrast that's sufficient for people with visual impairment. So, for example, if I was to use this color font on this background, that would not be compliant. Something like this, where it's a light color background with a dark font, is compliant. I used a specialist designer, hope you like it, my lovely branding, a specialist inclusive graphic designer to help me with this, because sometimes, like I said before, style over suitability isn't an option. You need to be finding out what is accessible in terms of design, layout, and what isn't. If you're familiar with the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, you might see that there are some parallels with this in the new law, but actually this goes a little bit further, and it requires you to do an audit of your websites and your digital platforms frequently. So not just once, we've done it, tick, our website's accessible. You need to be doing it frequently. You need to be doing a very strategic and well-planned audit very frequently on everything that you're doing for your events. It's not just a one-time fix. It's an ongoing thing. So I recommend working with a web developer who might specialize in accessibility and conducting some audits for like automated tools and manual testing by users with disabilities to try and get a sense of what's working and what isn't. And there are some really good resources that you can use, like Recite Me and other website accessibility checkers online that you can just run your website through, and it will tell you where you need to make some improvements, and then you can take that to your web developer. So ticketing and registration, for me, this is the key one. We need to be asking people and make it easier for them to tell us what they need to attend events. I think when we get into the Q&A, I'd like to go into a little bit more about where do we start? Do they tell us or do we ask them? Like, it's a bit of a chicken or egg situation, but we need to make sure that any opportunity we have to ask our attendees what we need to make their attendance at our events a successful one, we should be doing it, leaving it open-ended. The forms need to be clearly formatted, easy to navigate if you don't use a mouse, so if you're using a keyboard, they need to be easy to navigate, easy to read on a screen reader, so on and so forth. When we're selecting a ticketing platform, you should ask your vendors about what they're doing to be compliant, because you might learn something from them first and foremost about the kind of things that you should be including, and you're just probably better off getting some documentation from them as well about what their journey in this compliance process is, so that you don't end up being caught out by their lack of compliance. So digital communications, again, screen reader friendly emails. Did you know PDF documents are not accessible because they can't be picked up by a screen reader? Didn't know that till last week. Didn't know that. You have to do some treatment with tags and stuff. Kat's nodding at me like she knows. We'll pick on you later. You need to have, obviously, captions and image descriptions where you can. Digital agendas and any sort of digital attachments need to be accessible with a screen reader. And again, Recite Me can help you with that. It's a really good tool to use. So I reckon it's worth creating an accessibility checklist with your marketing team to just make sure that you're capturing all these standards and that you're not leaving anything not looked at. And there are some really good documents and supportive systems like Microsoft Office and Adobe who help you with this process. You don't have to do it all your own and just Google frantically, what do I do? These systems are there to support you with this, and the same goes for virtual and hybrid event platforms. Zoom is probably one of the most accessible platforms, but did you know that if you leave the chat box running during a Zoom webinar, it completely disrupts somebody using a screen reader and makes it non-accessible? Didn't know that either. So again, selecting your virtual event platform, you just need to have a proper evaluation and hear from them what they are doing to make it accessible. You're not expected to be an expert in this. You need to be working with your vendors and your partners who are the experts to make sure that everyone is compliant. It's a team effort. It's your event together. You need to be working together. Again, for hybrid events, you need to make sure that your in-person virtual attendees have the equivalent access to content and the participation opportunities. We know this already from pandemic and post-pandemic. We just need to make sure that everyone is kind of treated equally and not some people have some content and some people don't. Something that we have found really works well is just sending out transcripts after every virtual or hybrid event, just to make sure that anyone who might have missed something or would have to dip away or had trouble concentrating, they have access to that content and they haven't missed it and they can get it back on their own time. Can we transition to the next slide, please? Thank you. So, physical accessibility, I think, is probably, would you say that you're a bit more comfortable with than the digital? Yeah, same for us. We really felt like, and especially at the beginning of my journey here, I felt that the physical accessibility side of it was the biggest ask. And it is to an extent, depending on the scale of your event, but I think all the pre-work is that communications, the digital stuff. So we've covered that. That's the scary bit done. Phew. Physical accessibility, you're working on your venue selection criteria, but you need to start with a set of non-negotiables. So for example, does your venue have lifts that have the right dimensions for people using assistive wheelchair? Do they have separate spaces that you can use for quiet areas? Is there a defibrillator? What is their emergency procedure? So for example, if you're doing an event in a high-rise building, it's all well and good finding out that they're not planning an emergency evacuation, but if one does happen, what happens to the person who's arrived and uses a wheelchair, will they have to wait in the building before the fire services arrive, or does somebody have to wait with them? Like, you need to just know that detail. It's just best practice. It's just a nice thing to do, isn't it? Like, just, you need to know what these things are to make yourself better at knowing what all of the outcomes could be, which is what we do. It's our jobs, right? Navigation and wayfinding, just going back a little bit, I've also found out from our training that it makes the most sense to have all signage on one side of a venue. Obviously, it needs to be big, it needs to have big text, not text over images, just very clear, simple language, but it's accessible for people who might be neurodivergent or people who might have mobility issues, for signage to be laid out on one consistent side. So you're working through a venue, your signage is always on the left, they know where to look if they need extra support getting around. That's just one example. Support services and staff training. I've seen amazing examples of how staff can make the biggest difference when it comes to making an event inclusive and accessible or not. I was working at the Labour Party conference last year, and I saw people with accessibility steward sashes all around the venue to show people where there was a disabled toilet, where there was a lift, where there was a space for assistive like animal, as a guide dog or something, to go and relieve themselves or have water. Just that somebody who has that knowledge to be an accessibility steward, I think, makes the world of difference. And you can get things like this from Purple Tuesday, and there's an amazing resource on the Business Disability Forum website called Accessibility Essentials, and there's a big sort of library of tools and resources where you can learn about accessible language and just how to just improve your etiquette for people who might have a disability and they're coming to your events. So if we transition to the next slide, please. I'm almost there, guys. We can get chatting soon. So my first recommendation for you all is to conduct an accessibility audit, firstly of your digital presence, your websites, your reg systems, all of your communications. Get it done, work with your marketing team, work with your comms team, work with your IT team, and just get that done. That's the first step of being compliant. It's the digital side of it. That's where the emphasis of this new law is. And it's also the first touch point. If you're sending invitations for a London-based event to a European delegate, that's that first step for them, and it's compliant. You need to develop an accessibility policy. I think sometimes we're quite guilty of leaving our organisation policies at the door of our office, walking out to our events and doing our event, and not looking back at what our organisations stand for when it comes to accessibility, sustainability, all those things. They don't often marry up, so you need to make sure that your accessibility policy for your company matches what you're doing at your event. So if your company is saying, we're inclusive to everybody, regardless of their background, mobility, whatever, does your event reflect that too? And that goes for everything. Get some training, use Purple Tuesday, come to one of the training that me and Gabby Austin Brown are doing, join some communities, and use these free resources that I'm going to point you to. It's also really worthwhile checking out some consultants. Dr. Shani Dander is a really good consultant because she's an event manager as well. She's got great experience and a great perspective. There's also an influencer called Nick Wilson, and he does a sort of social media campaign where he goes to different venues and he checks them out. And this week he was at the IET in London Savoy Place, and he was amazed by the engineering of in front of this heritage building, where they've made it accessible by creating a set of steps that transforms into a lift. So cool. And then update your budgeting process. I know there's going to be a lot of questions about budgets in this, but the key is to build in accessibility first and then take it away if you need to. Don't retrofit it, because it becomes so expensive to do that. If you're building in accessibility solutions and inclusive solutions to your budget in the first instance, it's just going to make more sense to the bottom line, because then if you don't need it, you can take it away rather than adding it on later. You're setting yourself up for success if you do that. Okay, some useful resources. Do you mind? Thank you. Scan this. This is for the Inclusive Event Design Playbook. You'll have to answer a few questions via a little landing page, and then you can download the playbook. You can join the community. You should look at the European Commission's official guidelines. So I've been kind of trawling through it, This whole thing is basically me interpreting the law, what it means for event managers, because we don't really have that. I'm trying to do that for us right now. The Business Disability Forum, which I've mentioned a few times, Purple Tuesday, is an amazing organisation. They work to improve the experience of people with disabilities in a retail environment, but there are so many parallels with retail and events, so you can sort of marry those up. And then the things that I talked about, and just a shout out to Diversity Alliance because they do a great job. So I'm going to take some questions from Al now. I want to just get a sense from you of like what your biggest challenges are, and we can sort of brainstorm and then workshop them together, and then I can go.
But before, we should give a round of applause to Lizzy, because, I mean,
Oh, shut that.
for someone who got hurt by an experience some time ago, the fact that you've gone on this crusade is highly admirable. I've got a huge amount of time for you. One of the things we sort of discussed, and you touched on it, I'd be really interested, because I wasn't looking where you were, in terms of people's view in terms of the biggest barrier, I guess. Would it be digital versus physical? So if you're sort of more of the digital side, could you raise your hands whether you feel like that's the biggest, or is it versus physical? Okay. How about more the physical side? Do you think that's a bigger barrier to you? I think we're topping out about 50-50 roughly. Is that normal?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have I lost my thing?
No, you're in. You're in.
Um,
Yeah, you're good.
Yeah, I think it is. I think we've spent a lot of time trying to make accessible physical environments, because we assume that accessibility means step-free, ramp, lift, job done. And what this law aims to do, like I said, is to create a more full circle user experience for people with disabilities that isn't just, it's the sort of moment that they start to access a product or service to the time that they get to use it, you know? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it does. Right, so I'm going to not hog Lizzy. So has anyone got any questions? Oh, Cass, yeah.
Hi, Lizzy. Thank you for that. Same incident actually was at a venue last year, and we did the whole compliance. Is everything accessible?
Yep.
Yes, definitely is. This is the route. This is what we're going to take, and had a terrible experience on site with the person in a wheelchair, but I'm not going to go into detail. And what actually came out of that conversation was, as a venue, we offer the basics of accessibility in terms of how a delegate can come in from the door up to the main event space, how they come out. But that was it. And when we were kind of talking about how they would change their processes, or how they would change how they work with people with disability, neurodivergent, they almost seemed really reluctant, because to them it was just like, well, we've got lots of venues and we can't change every single venue to be able to be accessible, so we're trying to manage what we've got within the confines of our space, which I found quite odd.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to be the biggest challenge for event organisers, is working with venues to go through, tick the box, yes, we can all do that, but actually how do we then start making venues compliant with actually what our needs are. And as you say, it's not just accessibility, it's everything, and then coming back to the cost, because essentially that cost is going to come to us, but how can we have those conversations where it's almost on an equal footing, but as you say, is going to need to be a requirement?
Yeah. So
can I add something to that?
Yep.
Because we're talking about I think you've got it. Who goes first? So venue, event organizer. And can I throw delegate in there as well?
Yeah.
Who speaks first? Sorry, do you mind?
So first thing is, heritage venues are exempt to an extent from the law, but this is where I'm kind of encouraging all of you to change your priorities and sorry, heritage venues, love you, but we need to go to client stakeholders and say, these ones are accessible, these are the other ones that you have an option on, but these are the ones that are the accessible ones, so are you prepared to take to the event to this one and potentially have this experience with this user? First thing. Second thing on the experience of and who comes first, I think that we need to, I think it's important for us to bite first, because it's our reputations as event planners. We're the ones who have to be the one face to face with that attendee saying, sorry, that's not great for us, so we need to protect our own peace by doing that due diligence. That's my view. But also there is an emphasis on suppliers and venues telling you what they can do when they can't do other things. So part of the communication piece is, and when it comes to compliance as well, is saying we have these facilities, what else do you need? And if we can't provide that, here is your alternative. So you're not expected to cover every condition, every disability, every single person's need, because you would never get the job done. You can't boil the ocean, right? But I would say that you need to be really clear on what has happened or what can be done, so that you can allow that person to make the judgment for themselves and take responsibility for their own experience, but feel confident that you're there to support them rather than just turn up and they're not sure. And one of the things that we found from our surveying for the Inclusive Event Design Playbook, shout out, was that Isaac Harvey, who was one of our advisors on this, said that when he gets information from an event or event organizer, even if they haven't provided the things that he specifically needs, just being able to see that information there makes him feel confident that if he was to ask for it, they would do whatever they could to make it happen. And if they couldn't make it happen, they would provide an alternative. Was there a third part to that question, or have I?
No, that was great. Thank you. We've probably got time for one more question point. I think that from this side. Yeah, sorry, Lizzy. We should have extended the
Time flies when you're having fun, doesn't it, Al?
It's on me. Sorry, please.
Within the Act, is there anything around live captioning at events? So my company now, we do always ask about access requirements, and no one has made us aware as of yet that they do need live caption events, but it's something that we're really passionate to include in all of our events.
Yeah.
Is that something you're doing, or are you kind of waiting to kind of see what delegates present back to you and then tweaking your events around that?
That's a really good
Brilliant
question.
question,
That's a really good question. And it comes to my point around plan for accessibility first and then take it away if you know that it's not needed. I think, number one, accessibility benefits everybody. When I was hurling myself around as a pregnant woman in London a year or so ago, I found going to events really hard, and I didn't even have any specific extra needs. I just found it hard because my mobility was a bit more limited. If you're putting in captions for every event, everyone's going to love that because they can sort of zone out. Some of it is a bit sensory overload, right? If you're putting in captions, that really helps people to focus in as well, because it's less, it's something to focus in on. So if you're doing that, that's amazing. But I would say you need to plan for it in the first instance, get the data, get the information, and if you know that it isn't needed, you can take it away and save some money.
Top stat: 66% of people that watch Netflix watch with subtitles.
I do.
Yeah, me too. Yeah,
That's because I'm old.
sorry, if there's, I know we're going to run over a little bit, but budget, right?
Yeah.
So we talk about sustainability, it ends up in budget. We talk about accessibility, it ends up in budget.
Yeah.
Can we lance that one a little bit more? Can you give me a narrative on that before we go?
Yeah, so my advice on budgets, it's a tough one, isn't it? Because you have to show your ROI. You have to prove that the event's been worthwhile. I would say a good way to sort of harness the budget challenges to try and get the sort of multi-event agreement with your supplier or your partner is helping you with, like with the captioning, for example. I think MyClearText is a great company who does this. Try and sign on maybe 10 events to try and get each event at a cheaper rate. So sort of economy of scale kind of approach. That's my first step. And the second one is challenge back to whoever's arguing with you about your budget. Say, okay, if we're taking this away, what do you want the line to be if somebody says to me, I really needed this, but you didn't have it at your event? Is there somebody that I can speak to in the comms team who can help me manage our reputation, and what will the cost of that be? So try and sort of like layer on, if we don't invest in this, this is the outcome, or could be the potential outcome, so on and so forth. So make it more of a comms risk management argument rather than a monetary one. Because if you're having an argument with somebody over, EU legislation compliance, that's going to be more expensive than just chucking some captions on, isn't it?
Brilliant answer. Thank you so much. And again, just to underline that point that we made in Martin's Law, this is here now.
Yeah.
It's arrived. It's on us now. We've got to deal with it. And thanks, Lizzy, for helping us this afternoon deal with it.